The night gathered like a held breath over Castle Black, clear and bitter in the way that made every footstep ring on the wooden walkways and every word turn to pale smoke. The wall was a dark weight pressed against the stars, its face catching the faintest sliver of moon, so that here and there the ice showed a seam or a fissure, a ladder of trapped light climbing up into the cold. Snow drifted, not in proper flakes but in dust, as if some giant hand ground the winter down to powder and sifted it over the world. And where it settled, it softened the angles of the yard and the sloped roofs and the shoulders of the old trees that clung to the edge of the forest beyond the gate. Torches hissed and spat in their iron brackets. Horses blew steam into the air and stamped. Jon moved along the parapet with Ghost at his heel. The direwolf's paws scarcely made a sound, and his fur drank the shine from the torches until he was only a shape, a pale piece of winter walking beside him. Jon's gloved hand rested on the rough timber rail. He had stood on this stretch of walk 100 times and in a dozen kinds of cold, and the wall always felt new to him, as if it were not a thing made once and for all but a creature with a mood each night, ancient and not wholly known. Tonight it seemed wakeful. Two brothers hunched at a fire kettle, sharing some joke in low voices that died as Jon approached. They straightened, faces ruddy with heat and the sting of wind, gave him the short nod of habit. He returned it and went on. The watchtower loomed ahead, its windows shuttered against the draft. Somewhere within, a kettle of broth stewed and the smell of bay leaves and onion fought with the colder scents. The sharp iron of snow, the distant stink of the midden old wood, and now this new thing. A scorched, strange sweetness, like pine sap burned to smoke. That smell had crept into everything since the dragon had come. Rhaegal lay just beyond the far quarter, down in the hard-packed yard near the old blacksmith's shed. Wings folded, head resting on forelimbs the size of cart horses. At a distance you might mistake him for some massive heap of scales and shadows, but up close the scales were not all one thing. The green was edged in bronze and pearly in places, each plate rhymed where snow had settled, each ridged like the spine of a leaf. He watched Jon with a single long-lidded eye, gold with a slit of darkness set deep in it, and his breath came out as steam that coiled and thinned and vanished. The first time Jon had laid a hand on that broad, warm muzzle, his stomach had gone hollow with a fear he would not show. Not fear of being burned, not exactly. Fear of stepping past the boundary of the world he had known, of putting weight on the ice where it bent and groaned and finding it held. He had felt the heat and the pulse of thing beyond cattle or horse, the pulse of the sky itself, and he had thought of names he had never spoken with any belief. Targaryen, Valyrian, blood, fire. He had left his hand there until the dragon blinked and turned slightly, accepting his scent the way a hound might, although the slow intelligence in that eye had been nothing like a dog's. It had been like looking at a storm and knowing the storm could look back. Tonight Ghost sniffed and went to the foot of the stairs that led down to the yard, glancing up at Jon as if seeking permission. Jon scratched behind one of the direwolf's ears with a glove that had gone stiff with cold. He did not go down yet. The air was too calm. Far beyond the bright patch that was Castle Black, the forest, the shore, and then the ice field spread out to the horizon, a dark slope under a spill of stars. There had been movement there by daylight. Scouts had seen it and returned with faces like stone, and the horns had sounded twice at dusk. The dead were near again, near enough to bring the cold with them. It was not a matter of temperature. It was another kind of cold, the one that made the shadows seem more solid and the edges of things more precise. A breath held too long. "Still not sleeping," Ed Tollett said from the stairhead. He had a beard full of frost and a lantern that turned his cheeks yellow in its halo. "You should send for a bed of coals and a platter of something that once had a heartbeat. That's what a man with sense does when he's got nothing else to do but worry." "I've done my share of beds with coals," Jon said. He kept his voice light. The men listened even when they pretended not to. "Not much good if you need your eyes open. On my honor, mine open wider with a belly full of stew," Ed said. "They open when it comes back up if I try to walk the wall right after it." He squinted past Jon at the world beyond the lights. "It's clearer than it was at dusk. I don't like that." "They like the clear," Jon said. "They like the cold. We should like what they hate. They hate fire. Ed pulled his cloak close. I liked life better when fire meant a candle, a hearth, and a day-old loaf that didn't break a tooth. Now fire's wings and a mouth that could swallow the Lord Commander if he gets too friendly. He nodded down to the yard where Rhaegal lay. He's watching you. If a man had a mother who looked at him like that, he'd grow up to be king. Jon glanced down. The dragon's regard had a weight to it, as if each look left a handprint. He wants the open sky. He hates the pen. He's not penned, Ed said. We are. His teeth flashed in a grin that was less mirth than habit. Tormund's drunk already. He says if he must die, he wants to do it warm on the inside. Hates to waste a fire. I told him in that case he should swallow a torch. He suggested I light the other end first for him. Tormund's seen the dead too often to sleep, Jon said softly. So have you. Ed tilted the lantern again and peered outward. As have I. I talk because if I don't, my thoughts go to staring. Staring's a short walk to hearing things that aren't there. They are there, Jon said. We don't need to hear them yet. As you say, my lord, Ed said, then added with an attempt at ease. Though you're saying it doesn't prevent my ears from inventing a stray horn blast now and then. Make a liar of me, then. Call me a coward. Whatever makes it warmer. He paused. Sam's in the library again, scratching quills to nubs. He set out 3 books that look like they were written in a language that died because it got tired of itself. He muttered something about old wards wrapped around the wall like chains, and how some chains don't take kindly to being struck with. He said it very careful, with other powers. Jon's gaze moved to the dragon again, and then to the wall, vast and lightless, and back to the line of forest. The thought Sam had put into words had been gnawing at him since Rhaegal had been coaxed into landing in the yard 3 days ago. Coaxed by meat hauled on sledges and the steady calm of the men who had learned to walk within his view without making sudden movements, the way a man might walk near a cliff. Ancient things had their balance. He did not know enough. He only knew this. If they did nothing, the dead would come. If they came, the living would break. Where is Davos? He asked. Playing at stones with a smith whose luck is excellent until Davos takes it from him, Ed said. He said to tell you the tide will turn soon. He made a face. I told him the only tide I care about is the tide of whites. Then he said we'd better have our boats high on the bank. I told him we had no boats. He looked at me like I did him a wrong. That's a man who understands the sea and thinks oneself a fool for not having one to hand at all times. Send him up, Jon said, when he's won enough coin to keep us in onions for a week. As you command, Lord. Ed coughed and swallowed the title. The men had not all learned to say king in the north without a twist in their mouth, and Jon hadn't urged them. There were too many crowns, and crowns solved nothing at the edge of the world. Jon, Ed finished. He turned to go. Ghost's head lifted, ears pricked. His body went still, and then he rumbled. A sound low and rolling in his chest. Came as a touch through the cold. Not sound first, but a change in the feel of the night, the way a room feels when someone holds their breath behind you. Then the first horn, the old horn with its cracked mouthpiece, the note flat and honest in the air. 1 blast. Rangers. 2 beats. 2 blasts. Wildlings. They'd gone out earlier in small groups, some of Tormund's best, men who knew the woods and the sound of snow. 3 blasts would be for the others. For a moment the horn held its breath as well. The 3rd blast did not come. The 2nd died. Then the horn blew again, once. Pause and once more. Confusion. Jon leaned into the wind, as if the night might take him down the wall and across the snow. He had the strange feeling he knew what had happened, and not because anyone had told him. The men on the outer post had seen motion too near and did not know what kind, and fear had stumbled their hands. I'll fetch Davos, Ed said, and he was gone down the stair, lantern swinging. Jon put 2 fingers to his lips and whistled. Ghost sprang up the last steps to his side, bright eyes on him. With me? Jon murmured, and together they went down, past the long shadows of the torches, into the yard where heat struck his face like an open door. Rhaegal stirred. The dragon's chest rose, fell. A one-eyed steward sat with a spear across his knees, doing nothing with it. His hands were white-knuckled against the spruce shaft. "Easy," Jon said in a voice he had learned was not the one for horses, nor for men exactly, but the one that had no question in it and no anger either. "You'll scare no one with your knuckles. Loosen." The steward made the effort and managed to glare faintly to show that he still had some pride to hold on to. Jon approved. Pride, fear, hunger, those were all fuel when used. "How much meat left?" Jon asked without looking away from the dragon. 3 goats salt-cured, 1 fresh sheep from this morning, and 2 sides of beef. The cook says he will haunt you over if you give to him, the steward said. "You'll be haunting the cook with him if we don't have him," Jon said. He stepped closer, until the air that came off Rhaegal was like standing too near a smith's forge, a dry heat that warmed bone. He could smell the dragon. Sulfur, iron, a hint of blood, the wild rankness of a creature that bathed in ash and sun. "Hungry?" he asked, not expecting an answer he could understand and yet bracing for what might feel like one. Rhaegal's nostrils flared. A boot scraped, and Tormund came out from the shadow of the shed, beard frosted and eyes small with satisfaction. "You smell that, Crow? That's courage," he said, tossing his chin toward the dragon. "Men will tell you courage smells like sweat or horse, but it smells like this. It burns your nose. It tells you not to run." He clapped Jon on the shoulder hard enough to stagger him. "You look too serious for a man with a mountain at his side." "I wish the mountain listened," Jon said. "I can drag a horse by the head. I can't drag a mountain." "Mountains don't need dragging," Tormund said. "They need climbing. Or you stand next to them and pretend they're yours, and the world believes you a while." His grin went crooked. "When do you ride him?" Jon turned his head. The question had been sitting between his shoulder blades all day, pressing. "When I have to." "When you have to," Tormund repeated with an impatience that was more affection than insult. "When the wind tells a man he must piss, he pisses. Now is a good time." He leaned closer, voice softer, a rasp. "They're out there. I sent 4 of my best to see how near, and 2 came back with their beards frozen and their eyes like men who have walked too far inside themselves. They saw a line of hem not 2 miles from the tree line, more behind and more, not marching yet, standing like stones in a river, but they were looking. You know what I mean, Crow? You know the feeling." Jon did. He had felt it at Hardhome when he'd stood on a beach turned to a killing ground and felt the cold look at him. It had been like standing across a field from someone and knowing that they had met your eyes and marked you, and that one day when you thought yourself safe and were thinking of soft things, they would find you. He put his hand on Rhaegal's neck, where the scales smoothed to something almost like hide, where the heat went deeper. Rhaegal's eye slid closed and then open again slowly, like someone content after slaughter. "Davos," Jon said as the Onion Knight came across the yard, cloak flying, the lantern light catching in the grooves of his smile. "How do you feel about riding dragons?" "I feel I've not yet drunk enough to consider it, my lord," Davos said without slowing. He reached them and stood, breathing a little hard. "I've 2 grown sons carved out of old rope and salt who take a boat into the teeth of a gale rather than a saddle onto a beast that might consider them supper. Not that I object to it in principle. I object to almost everything in principle, so it's no mark against the creature." "They're close," Jon said. "Tormund's men saw them. We have 2 choices I can stomach. We send fire to meet them, or we wait and try to hold the wall when they throw themselves at it." "And the third choice?" Davos asked. "To run," Tormund said, and spat. Davos rubbed the line of his jaw. His eyes went to Rhaegal and stayed there a moment. "I know little of walls," he said, "only of hulls. But when I see a storm rolling in at sea, I don't anchor and hope the rope holds. I try to cut into the wind, meet it on a slant where it does me less harm. If your friend there will let you, I'd prefer to meet this storm at our choosing." He looked aside toward the black mass that was the wall. "But there's what Sam muttered. The wall's old magic. It doesn't know our friendships. It might not care for dragonfire. I don't know a thing about it, but that doesn't mean it won't decide to show us its opinion." Jon had imagined it often. The dragon lifting into the night like a thrown spear, the river of flame pouring down, the dead tumbling and blackening, the white walkers cracking like glass struck by a hammer. In none of those imaginings had he been certain what the wall would do. Would it repulse the dragon like a second sky? Would it thirst? He looked up again at that sheet of night and wondered if it looked back into him as the dead did. There was no choice that was not a risk. The dead were the largest risk of all. "Sam," he said, "bring him." "Already here," came the breathless reply. Sam appeared at the edge of the light with a book clutched to his chest, the skin at his cheeks red with cold and effort. He was bundled too tightly, as ever, like a boy stuffed into a man's clothes. But he had a stubborn set to his mouth that made him look older. "I thought you might want me," he said, and then, panting, "I read something, two somethings. In one, a maester argues that fire is fire, whether it comes from wood, coal, oil, or dragon. And in another, a much older bit of a much older something, a woman, one of the singers, I think, writes of walls that drink and walls that bleed. It wasn't about our wall exactly. It was a story. But there was a sense to it that sometimes what is meant to hold out a thing is also meant to be fed. I can't be more helpful than that. I wish I could." He swallowed. "I'm frightened," he added, with the clear honesty that always undid John a little. "I like him," Tormund said. "He knows what he is." "So do I," John said, and he let the fear he himself carried settle in a familiar place, neither nurtured nor denied. He stroked the line of Rhaegal's jaw. The dragon's mouth opened a fraction, and the smell of heat was a thing he could almost taste. "If I keep the flame beyond the wall, if I don't bring it near the ice, we might not wake anything. If I burn them where the snow's deepest," he trailed off. "And if you do wake something?" Davos asked quietly. "Then I'll see it," John said, "and then I'll know. And if I wait and do nothing, we all die without knowing." He met each gaze in turn, steady. Tormund's with its wild pride, Davos's with its quiet good sense, Sam's with its watery courage. "Rouse the men. Keep the ramps clear. If the dead move to the wall, we'll need oil ready and arrows lit. But if I can break them before then, if I can make them scatter, if I can destroy the ones that hold them together, the rest may fall." "The White Shadow men," Tormund said softly, as if the words were a charm. "Break them, and the others die like candles in wind." John nodded. He stepped back and took hold of the leather rig that the smiths had assembled with hands near shaking. A contrivance of straps and loops and buckles meant to at least give him a place to set his weight and something to hold that wasn't the edge of a scale. It had been stitched fast across the strongest part of Rhaegal's back where the ridges ran like hills. It did not feel like a proper thing. It felt like a token gesture to the gods of horses. But it was what they had, and the dragon had suffered its making with a sort of offended patience only because John's hands and voice had been there the whole time, and bits of meat too, and the understanding that sometimes a creature allows what would never be allowed from another hand. It was not the first time. He had ridden once in daylight, a low glide over a frozen field near Winterfell, heart stuttering as the ground fell away, hands locked and jaw set. He had felt there then a quickness in himself and a reaching he had not had since he was a boy and first climbed the high places of the Stark keep to look out over the roofs. He had not felt human, not Prisai. Saily, he had felt like something that watched humans from above, a creature that could choose to pass over them or descend. He remembered the way birds had scattered. He remembered the sound his own voice made when he tried to say anything at all. It had been laughter, breathless, astonished, edged in fear. Rhaegal had settled to earth when called and soaked in praise the way a warhorse bathes in water. It had been easy to pretend then that it was a thing they could repeat, safer each time. Tonight he did not pretend. Tonight there was nothing safe in him. He swung up. The leather was stiff under his thigh, the ridges beneath Rhaegal's scales warm and unyielding. Ghost trotted to the foot of the dragon's shoulder and sat, then lay down, as if to anchor them both. John looked down at him and felt a pang, sharp and bright as winter sun. "Guard," he said. Ghost lowered his head to his paws in agreement that sat between command and kinship, the rare yes that felt like an embrace. Davos came to the dragon's fore and laid a hand briefly on its shoulder as if greeting a ship before launch. "I'd cross myself if I knew any gods that favored me," he said. "I'll do it anyway." He drew a shape in the air, an old salt's warding sign, then met Jon's gaze. "Don't be brave for the sake of brave," he said, simple as a rope knot. "Be brave because there's no other way." "Do you want me to say anything?" Sam said helplessly. "Like an old tale? The part about heroes having honor or hearts like old trees?" "You're doing it," Jon said. "Keep the fires ready. If I come down with the dead behind me, you'll need to buy me a moment." Tormund slapped Rhaegal's haunch as a man slaps a horse to send it off, and Rhaegal turned his head sharply with a little hiss and a damp flare of steam. Affronted, Tormund laughed, delighted. "Fly, then," he said. "Go cut a hole in the night." Jon pressed his knees, leaned forward, and whispered nonsense. Words he had heard Daenerys say, words in a language that tasted of salt and heat. It felt foolish to give orders in a tongue he barely held, but the sound of it mattered to the dragon or to Jon's own courage. He could not say which. "Dracarys," he said very softly, not to command flame but to call up in himself the thought of it. Rhaegal's muscles bunched under him, and then the world fell away. The first touch of wind took his breath. The yard dropped into a shape of torn shadows and glow, and the men there became small, and ghost a pale spot that spun and steadied. And then they were over the low wall where the horses were tethered, and the smell of straw and dung came up once and vanished, and the dark reached up with open hands. Rhaegal's wings hit the air in long, slow strokes that made no noise at first, as if the wind itself was only a cloth moved quietly. Then there came the steady rush, the low thunder of muscle and air, and Jon's heart found its place in that old rhythm that had nothing to do with a woman or a crown or even a family name, only with being alive in a way that set the skin of his face taut and watered his eyes. He did not dare wipe them. He did not look down immediately. He looked ahead, where the world sharpened toward the horizon and the stars trembled with their cold light. The wall fell behind them, a black cliff. The land beyond it opened like a flat hand. He felt Rhaegal choose a path the way a wolf chooses a path, reading scent and air and something else almost like intention. There was a hum under him, not sound, and he found himself breathing with it, like a man who has been taught to move with a horse finds himself anticipating each footfall without thought. When he looked down, he saw fires, a few human ones, where their outposts stood low and steady in iron braziers. He saw the lighter patches of snow in shallow dips and the darker stretches of scrub. He saw, at last, a broad stain as if a lake had frozen with ash trapped in the ice and new snow had only thinly dusted it. In the midst of that, he saw no movement. He had learned not to trust that. The dead could stand so still that a man's eye slid past them. They could be the shadows of shadows until they chose not to be. Rhaegal's head lifted slightly. The hum changed. Jon felt the need for the voice that carried command, though he did not know what command would mean to a creature that knew the sky and flame as its home. He made a sound anyway, an old sound from the throat, not a word but a shape of expectation. The dragon banked, and the world turned, and Jon's stomach went with it. They came around in a wide, slow circle, giving him a long look at the dark smear. Something glittered briefly, ice on armor on a blade, and his heart tightened in recognition. He saw the line then. Not a smear but a formation, loose and uneven where the ground pitched, tighter where it flattened. Men would look at it and think formation first, but Jon had fought them and knew the difference. No one among them minded stepping where the man before him had fallen. They did not tire. They did not think. They waited because waiting was part of another will. He saw them move at last, just a little like a field of barley nodding when a breath of wind crosses it. The motion was not timed with nature. It dropped his stomach. Jon swallowed and found his hand had already reached for the leather loops, knuckles white. The dragon's heat came through the leather to his skin even in the bitter flight. He breathed it in and it steadied him. What he had to do was simple to say, "Find the pale ones. Break them." Fire had made them fall before. He had seen it. Valyrian steel broke them too, and dragonglass, but fire made their soldiers collapse in masses when the one that held them together went. It was a way to make an impossible number of enemies become a smaller number quickly. He looked for pale movement among the black. He looked for the glint that was not ice but something colder. Rhaegal made a sound, a rasp like stone on St. and his throat bulged. Jon could feel the heat gather. He found himself speaking not because dragons listened but because men did. Perhaps someone on the wall would hear and understand, or perhaps his own heart needed the word. "Now," he said, a mere breath at first, and then louder, throat raw. "Now." Rhaegal's jaw opened wider, and the night became day in a line that moved across the snow. Flame poured out in a torrent that did not so much dance as reach, a thing with hunger. It scythed across the front of the waiting dead, and where it went, the world changed color. Orange and gold and a strange pearly green that had nothing to do with the dragon's scales and everything to do with the air itself taking fire. The sound was a roar, not only the dragons but the sound of snow turning to steam and flesh to ash. 1,000 small snaps as ice shattered, 1,000 puffs as leather and cloth yielded to heat. They banked again and came across the line a second time. Jon saw them blacken. He saw them burst, the whites. He saw their arms go up in a parody of supplication and then vanish in the brightness. He saw a white walker, a pale figure on foot, not mounted, blade lifted, its hair streaming in an unfelt wind. Turn its head slowly toward him and lift that blade. The sword caught the light of the dragonfire and did not accept it. It shone with its own cold, and the air around it trembled. Rhaegal's flame washed over the whites near the Pale One and they fell, jerking like meat on spits. The Pale One stepped forward into the edge of the flame and did not burn, but its skin cracked in a thin net of lines, and a sound like a distant bell came across the space. It lifted its arm and threw. Jon did not see the spear until it left the pale hand. It was a shard of the night itself, black with edges of frost, and it came in a straight line up, too fast. Rhaegal dropped a wing, dropped hard, and the spear passed by with a hiss. Jon felt the wind of it on his cheek, unnatural, too cold for even this air, a cold that left a numb line. He turned his head and watched it vanish into the dark. The dragon lunged back upward, the air pressing Jon's body deep into the leather. The second pass was lower. Rhaegal's breath came in great pulses that shuddered his shoulders, and Jon had the sense that the dragon enjoyed the hard thing now that it had been shown it could be done. Like a fighter who has found his rhythm in the ring and wants to stay long enough to savor it. Jon bent forward against the pull of his body, wanting to sit back, and said, "Higher." Not in Valyrian or the common tongue, but in the universal language of a rider. The dragon gave him a wing's beat and then another, grudgingly. Below, fire traced lines in the snow. The dead had begun to move, some forward, most back, not in panic but in that peculiar retreat that is not a retreat but a regathering of will. The Pale One stepped through them as if waiting, and where they passed, the whites who had been scattering turned to face the dragon. They lifted their hands. Some had spears, some had nothing. It did not matter. It was reflex, like grass leaning toward a sun that would scorch it. Rhaegal's breath was shorter now and more frequent, as much steam as flame curling from his nostrils between blasts. Jon did not know how long a creature could burn the world. He could not gamble on finding that limit. He looked for the white walkers with a ferocity that made his eyes ache. He found 3 in a cluster, standing apart from the whites as if distance were a kind of armor. One carried a spear, one that cold bright blade, and one nothing at all, hands open as if in welcome. He pointed, not because pointing would help the dragon see what he already saw, but because pointing steadied the man, and Rhaegal tucked and dove. The speed made his eyes water harder, made his breath come in grunts he could not hear. He'd been a boy once and fallen from a tower and lived. He remembered the helplessness of air. Now he had the opposite. The air was his, held by the creature beneath him. At the last instant Rhaegal flung his head back and vomited fire, poured over the Pale Ones. The first 2 cracked like thin plates of ice broken under a heel. The third stepped into the flame and lifted his head as if to drink it. For one heart-stopping instant Jon thought it had no effect. Then the head exploded with a sound like a hammer on iron, and the body fell in a shower of brittle stuff that was not bone and not snow. The whites nearest that point shuddered, stopped, and fell like puppets with cut strings. In a wave it traveled outward, as if the ground itself were shrugging them off. Jon whooped, surprised at himself. The sound came out higher and younger than he felt. Rhaegal flared his wings and screamed in a voice that went through Jon's skin and sat in the meat of him. They banked again. It might have gone on like that. A slaughter under stars, had the sky remained what it was. But as the dead broke and recoalesced and the dragon burned the field in wide lines, a new wind arrived, not moving across the ground so much as falling from above, a column of cold that descended like a cautious hand. When it touched Jon's face, the skin tightened and his tongue went flat in his mouth. Rhaegal flinched, not in fear but in offense, and the flame he exhaled next came shorter, harsher. The color changed at the edges as if the cold and the fire were mixing and not liking it. Where the wind reached the snow, it made little devils of powder spin up. Where it reached the fire, it did not snuff flame as water would. It made the flame flicker and lie low, like a cat flattening itself. Jon looked up. The stars had gone a little less sharp. He had not seen a cloud roll in. He saw only the effect. He had a sudden image of a hand placed over a lantern. Not to smother, to shelter. He shook the image off and told himself it was nothing more than weather made strange by fear. He didn't believe his own thought. Rhaegal moved his head as if scenting something he hated. They struck the dead again, this time raking fire across them quickly and then climbing to stay out of whatever the falling cold was. Jon searched for more pale ones and found none in the near field. There would be others, but perhaps farther back. He gauged distance. He could press farther out and find them, break more of the army. But the longer he stayed aloft, the more the new cold and the wall's own stark air bit into both dragon and man. "Once more," Jon said aloud. "Once more. Fill their eyes with fear." He had never thought he'd speak of fear as a gift for his enemies. Yet he saw it now. Even a dead thing can learn something of what it cannot bear. He had learned, at Hardhome, that they could fear being left without that will that held them. They went low and long, flame flickering, and he watched the dead break again, watched the wave of collapse as some unseen node in their company shattered. He felt a fierce, unkingly joy, like the set of a blade in a familiar hand. They were doing it. They were carving back the dark. Then a spear came out of nothing and struck. Rhaegal had moved his head to take another breath, jaw open. The muscles along his neck stood like cables. The spear took him at the base of the neck where the scales overlapped in a seam and where the leather rig wrapped just forward of Jon's thigh. The impact was a physical thing in Jon's body, like being struck hard from the side. The spear did not crunch as it went in, as it would in a beast or man. It slid, a sound like a winter river breaking under a skater. Rhaegal screamed. He did not fall. He reared, wings beating once with a force that made Jon's vision blink. The spear protruded at a slant, black with frost at its rim, and then turning to a thick rime as the dragon's heat fought the cold of it. Where it went through, steam rose, not smoke. Jon felt heat against his leg, tasted iron in the air. He swore and bunched his legs, shifting his weight forward so his body would not be thrown back and off as the dragon lurched. "Hold," he said into the wind, "because they tell you that you must speak to beasts like you believe they understand, and because habit is its own prayer. Hold, strong." He said other words then that meant nothing and meant everything. "My child, my brother, my heart," not out of any certainty about what the dragon was to him, but because in that instant he had no other soft words left, and the hard ones would crack. Rhaegal did not answer in any way a man would read, but his body settled enough that the panic in Jon's limbs eased, and the dragon sought height, great beats of wing pulling them up, up, until the cold stabbed Jon's lungs and the world below went flat once more. He got his breath and forced himself to look down again instead of at the wound. The spear had come not from near, not from any pale figure on foot, but from farther back in the mass where the movement was slower. Either one of the walkers had made a longer throw than he had seen, or something else had thrown it. He did not see the thrower. He saw only the effect. Where the spear had been thrown, the dead near that point were still as stones, hands down, heads tilted, as if listening for orders yet unspoken. That chilled him in a way the spear had not. He had learned to fear order in their chaos. It meant something new was learning him in turn. They wheeled then, a slow, grudging circle as Rhaegal tested the pain of his neck and found what motion he could do without tearing the spear further. He could not crane his head to take another deep breath without pulling at the wound. He could breathe enough for short bursts, small tongues of fire that would scorch and burn but not sweep a field. Jon made the calculation without quite making it. They had done some breakage. The wave of the dead had bowed. If they pressed, they might shatter more. If they stayed, they might also fall out of the sky with a dragon whose life he would not gamble if there were another choice. "Back," Jon muttered. "Back to the wall. We've cut them. Let the ground fire do the rest." The pull in him to strike again, to make another bright cut, was almost physical. He had never known he possessed such appetite. He hated it even as it thrummed at the base of his skull. Rhaegal's own mind, if mind was the word for that deep impatience and pride, rubbed against Jon's choice. He felt it as he might feel a strong horse want to take a fence twice as high as needed. Jon bent low and flattened his hand to the dragon's neck, just 4 of the wound. "Back," he said, steady. "We'll return. We will. Back now." The dragon listened, or perhaps pain and the old instinct of beasts to seek their roost at hurt overruled the call of flame. He turned, and the wall became once more a dark cliff with a man's toy lights scattered along its lip. The new cold reached after them like the memory of a hand. It did not pursue far. It dropped away when they climbed. Jon did not like the sense that something conscious had chosen not to follow. He swallowed that down and kept his seat and spoke to Rhaegal in the same voice he had used with frightened horses and men reaching for the courage to do what they already wanted to do. They came in low because Rhaegal could not climb much more without dragging at the spear. Jon saw Ghost leap up and down once when he caught the shape of them, and then the dire wolf ran the length of the yard with a series of bounds that was almost a dance. It made Jon open his mouth in a smile that was not joy, and then the wind took it and made it a grimace. Men ran. They shouted, a ragged cheer that made no shape of words at all. Torches bobbed. The gate will turn slowly, as if the men were not used to their hands and had to think through each twist. Rhaegal hit the yard harder than he liked. Jon felt the impact in his spine. The dragon folded one wing in cleanly, the there with a shudder, and then he bowed his head low until his chin nearly touched the dirt, as if he had to put something of himself into the ground to keep from being pulled apart. Jon slid down before anyone could bring a ladder. He landed awkwardly, went to one knee, then surged to his feet, an ache lighting in his thigh and his left shoulder. He had once prided himself on falling well. He did not do it as well now, but he did it quickly. "Ladders," he rasped, and then realized ladders were not what he needed. Water, hot cloths, the smith, some, gods, some. He heard himself scatter commands and did not care. The men needed to do something with their hands. They would be less useless if each held a thing. He moved to the wound. Up close the spear was worse. The frost of it had eaten into the edges of the scales and made them brittle, and where the heat of Rhaegal met the unnatural cold, they made a fog-like breath in deep winter. The flesh around it was swollen already, angry. There was blood, bright and dark both depending on where it lay, and the snow under the dragon's neck had turned to a red slush that did not freeze even as the night would have it. Jon put his hand on the spear. The heat and cold both met him. His glove stuck for a heartbeat and he had to pull with care to keep from leaving the leather there. Rhaegal's eye rolled and fixed on him, and Jon had that coastal ledge feeling again, that only one step backward existed and the sea waited beyond. He did not step. "Don't pull it out yet," Davos said, appearing at his shoulder with that uncanny sailor's timing that put him always at the right rope when something was sliding. "Your face says you want to, but what stops the bleeding might be that." He gestured with his chin at the spear, unwilling to touch it, disgust evident in the set of his mouth. "Let the smith see, and if the smith does not know, let the healer see. There's a healer, isn't there? There's always a healer. There's a woman with willow bark and a steady hand," Ed said. He had a strip of cloth in his hand and no idea what to do with it. She makes a compress that tastes like it died, but it does for throats. This isn't a throat, Tormund observed. This is something else. He shoved in close and peered as if into the mouth of a bear's den. Cold iron? Cold nothing. Cold is nothing. I don't like it. It's not iron, Sam said, voice thin with alarm and curiosity both. It's their ice, the ice that doesn't melt right. It endures. Every tale says so. The edge stepped in, wary and drawn. His round face was pale and beaded with sweat despite the cold, and his breath plumed strongly. He had brought the book with him somehow, and damned if he had not tucked it under his arm as if it were a child. Heat and dragon fire and Valyrian blades, those are what unmake it. He swallowed audibly, and even that may not unmake it at once. Then heat, Jon said. He lifted his hand from the spear, and it came free of the frost reluctantly with a thin tearing sound. We can bring heat. Not too much near the wall, Sam said weakly, because he had to say it. His books were his courage and his worry both. If it is true, if there are wards, if they do not like. We won't set the wall on fire with a kettle, Ed said. He pointed the cloth at the nearest man. You go get a barrel of hot water. You, with the long face, get the woman with the willow bark that tastes bad. You, with the better beard than mine, find the smith and tell him there's work that might be blasphemous. The three men looked offended in their differing ways, which was a kind of comfort, and took off. Tormund, Jon said. Your men. How far did the line go? Far enough that if you lay on your back with your feet against the wall, Tormund said. You could count until your breath ran out and you were still not done. 1,000 steps. 2,000. I didn't measure. There were more coming. The ones you broke will make more. That's always the way. He set a hand on Jon's shoulder then, heavy and kind, and it surprised Jon. The gentleness of it surprised him almost as much as the sudden hardness at its center. You did a bold thing, Tormund said low. You made them stumble. That's not nothing. It felt like a wave breaking some, Jon said. His throat closed around the tell of pain. It felt like the right thing, and then the world got new rules. It always does when you're about to win, Davos said. You learn the last rule then. It's never the same rule as the first. They worked then, not like men in a story, but like men in a yard with a hurt thing too big for their understanding. The woman with the bitter willows came and clucked and shoved men aside and laid her palm on Rhaegal's neck with as much calm as if she tested a fevered child. She spoke to him the way women speak in kitchens to pots that have boiled too long, not expecting the pot to answer, but confident that it will settle anyway under the right tone. She did not ask permission of Jon. He liked her the better for it. If you pull it straight, you'll tear what's sealing it, she said. If you leave it, it'll rot the flesh. There's sauce for both fish and meat, and neither tastes good. I'd prefer the fire, if you want my say. You want us to melt it, Davos said, dismayed and fascinated both. I want you to warm the metal of your spear as near as you dare, she said. I want you to curse the makers of this thing. I want you to pray to old gods and new and any gods that ride dragons and any that made the wall. And I want you to pour the water you have so carefully boiled into my basin and stop talking. She slapped her damp hands together. You, big as a bear, yes you. Stand where the dragon can see you and nod at him if he looks like he'll bite me. Be a wall. You, with the books, put the book down and hold the cloths. Heat, then cloth, then heat again. We'll coax it. Sam held the cloths. He looked as if he might faint and as if he'd rather die than drop them. He licked his lips and almost asked a question and then did not. Tormund stood where he was told, arms folded, chin high, every bit of him a declaration. Davos tended the fire under the kettle, coaxing it like a friend coaxing another to one last drink. Ed managed the men, the flow of water and cloth and silence. Jon kept his hand on the dragon and his eyes shifting between the wound, the woman's face, and the dragon's eye. They did not have to melt the spear. They had to warm what flesh would permit. It made a sound like eating when the heat touched that cold. The sound made Jon's stomach turn. Rhaegal did not bite. He flinched once, a huge ripple that sent men stumbling. But Tormund held him by looking at him hard enough that even a dragon respected it. And the woman laid the cloths and they steamed, and she changed them out and changed them out again. She spoke as she worked, to keep the air full of the sound of a voice that was not fear. "You remember," she said, "when you were all small and got splinters? You'd whine and cry and swat at your mother's hand as if she'd put the wood in you on purpose. Then you'd give in and she'd take it and you'd stop crying before she was done. This is the same, only the splinter is bigger and the child could swallow me like a bit of broth and never know it." She sucked in a breath through her teeth. "There. See? The sweating now. The sweating like a fever. Good, good." Jon did not realize he had been whispering nonsense again until Sam repeated a word with a puzzled expression. Jon shut his mouth and then found he could not. The air needed his breath in it or he would burst. He put his head against the tough warm hide of Rhaegal's neck in a brief press, feeling the tremor of the dragon's life under his cheek. "You'll fly," he said. "You'll fly again, you stubborn ridgeback. You'll tear the sky and the sky will learn manners." He was not sure who he was promising to, perhaps himself. The spear did not come free that night. The woman forbade it. "He bleeds like a king," she said once dryly. "He'll bleed more if you take his stopper. Let him knit around it just so. We'll see what morning will have us do." She set men to grinding willow bark into a drink. Rhaegal refused it haughtily when it was offered. She rolled her eyes. "A prince," she said, and went to lay compresses on the neck again, as if she had been called to attend to a fussy infant. At last, when the worst was done he could do, Jon let his shoulders slump. He became aware that his fingers were numb where they had not burned, that the scar on his belly ached in a way that had nothing to do with the cold, that his mouth was sour with smoke and old fear. The yard had changed in that imperceptible way that yards do when work finishes. The air less tight, the torches lower, men's voices turning back to themselves. The sounds of preparation continued. The clatter of a kettle lid, the groan of the gate will test it again, the rustle of arrows in a barrel as someone checked their fletching. But the note of it was different. The spectacle had passed. The waiting returned. He thought of the field beyond the wall, pocked and blackened where Rhaegal's fire had done its work. He thought of the wave that had collapsed outward with the shattering of the Pale Ones. He thought of the cold that had lowered itself carefully over them all. He thought of the spear and its thrower unseen. The little joy that had leapt in his chest when the field had broken, that small, bright, treacherous thing, lay now like a coal under ash. If he blew, it would flame. He did not blow. He turned to where Sam stood, holding his book like a shield. "Tell me what you think I did," Jon said. He meant what we did, he and the dragon and the heat and all of them who had not broken. But he chose I. He would not pass the burden of it to a beast or to chance. "You burned them," Sam said, simple. His eyes were very tired. "And you learned something. We all learned something." He swallowed, his throat bobbing. "We learned they can reach you, a distance. We learned Dragonfire still breaks the White Walkers. What you did, we saw it from the wall, what you did made them. The whites fell and did not rise. Not some of them. All the ones around those. It went out like a ripple. It was real." He blinked, as if he could wipe that sight from inside him. "But the other thing, the cold that fell, the spear that came from nothing." "Not nothing," Davos said, from where he leaned like a carved figure at the bow of a ship that had found harbor. "From something we didn't see. That's what I fear most," Sam said. "That there is more. That we have not seen the thing that commands them best of all." Jon looked toward the line beyond the gate as if he might see through the wood and snow to the heart of it. He saw only the dark. He had never known the dark to be so articulate. Said, "I have more." He swallowed and tasted ash. "We'll have to break whatever that is," he said. His voice did not shake, which surprised him. His hands did not either, which surprised him more. "We'll have to find it, but first we hold. We do not flinch until we learn how." Spoken like a cook explaining how he holds a kettle until it boils, Ed said. "You know what to do. Get burned." He straightened and grimaced at his own attempt at cheer. I'll see the ramps are clear, Lord John, and I'll tell the men that you made the dead dance. They like a story. It makes them sing better at dawn. If we're singing at dawn, we will be, Tormund thundered, his voice filling the space with life and afterlife both. And if we aren't, someone will hear us anyway. The birds, the dead, the gods. I don't care which. He clapped John again, this time a little gentler. You did well. Tell that to him, John said, nodding at Rhaegal. I would, but his ears are like hands that smack me away, Tormund said approvingly. He leaned close and whispered, "D something to the dragon" in a burble of the old tongue. The dragon opened one eye disdainfully and steamed on him. Tormund laughed. The yard thinned as the men took themselves to guard posts, to their cups, to the hard benches by the braziers. Ghost, who had paced the length of the yard and back 20 times without, you could say, looking tired, came to stand pressed against John's leg. The weight warmed him more than any fire. He buried a hand in the direwolf's ruff and thought of nothing for 3 breaths, then all the things at once for the 4th. Winterfell's long hall, Sansa's voice from a letter 2 days old, Arya's sharp look, Bran's absence that felt like a hole cut in a map, Daenerys's hand on the neck of this dragon's brother, the way her eyes had warmed when she saw Jon's hand on Rhaegal, the long line of men on the wall the first time he had stood there as a boy and thought himself a man. Come on, Davos said. The Lady of the Willow Bark will keep him company. Let's let Sam show you the page that reads you your future without having the kindness to say it out loud. He tipped his head toward the tower. Jon would have stayed in the yard like a dog who refuses to leave a wagon where his man is dying, but he knew he would be worse than useless if he did. He let Ghost press him along, and he let Davos's shoulder be a thing to lean on for a step without showing that he had. Sam went ahead, hurrying with the anxious step of a man who wants to guide someone to a place he does not trust to be safe. Inside the tower, the air was warm and stale, heavy with oil and that special dust that old vellum makes when you open it to the world. The lanterns threw a gold lie onto the stone. It made the place seem kind. Sam had laid out the books with a care that suggested a sort of reverence. Even the one he had tucked under his arm he unwrapped as if he'd been cradling an infant against a winter wind. He fussed at the edges, smoothing them, and then poked at a page with his finger. Here, he said, and his voice, for all that it shook, held that other thing too. Pride in the words he had wrestled from old hands. The page was in a script that had more curves than Jon liked. Sam had written a translation on a scrap he had weighted down with a piece of coal. The translation was not elegant. It did not need to be. Fire above ice wakes ice beneath, it read. So speak the walls and the waters. To strike at a lake with fire is to teach it to steam. To draw steam from a lake is to teach the air to drink. Beware the drinking. What does that mean, in the language of men who hammer nails and cut meat? Davos asked, leaning with his elbows on the table, his big hands braced as if against a swell at sea. I don't know, Sam admitted, pain in the words. It might mean nothing. It might mean we should not send fire above something that is held by cold because it makes something else happen. Or it might be a piece of very pretty nonsense. The other bit I told you, the bit about the walls that like offerings, here. He found a place where the ink had faded to the color of tea and the letters looked like they had been dabbed with the tip of a feather by someone with a shaking hand. He read it in the old tongue and then in his own. She built a wall from the river, and the river paid it with fish. She built a wall of reeds, and the reeds brought her birds to eat. She built a wall of song, and it brought her dreams. And when a trier came to break the wall with a piece of sun stolen from noon, the wall said, "Oh, if you feed me, sun, I will become a day." And it did. And it burned the trier and her friends and the maker of the song together. That's not a wall, Ed said from the doorway, where he leaned like a piece of furniture that had carried itself into the room for want of anyone else to move it. That's a woman with a talent for making a mess. It's a story, Sam said, but the old stories, they have hands sometimes. They reach forward and touch the things we think are not stories. Or we reach back and drag the stories to us because we need their shapes to understand ours. What he's saying, Davos interpreted, smiling a little at Sam the way a man smiles at a child who has said something wise without the swagger men use for their own wisdom, is that if you feed flame to a thing made of not flame to make it do what you want, you may teach it how to love flame, and then it loves it too much. Jon pinched the bridge of his nose. He had a headache that felt like a strip of sharpened iron laid across his brow. I kept the fire as far out as I could, he said. If the wall has to be fed, if it must be paid, I paid far from it. The words felt foolish in his mouth and yet not. You could tell yourself you were too practical to speak of payment to a thing of ice. The world didn't care what you told yourself. Sam saw the weariness and touched his arm, the gesture timid and true at once. You did right, he said. We can talk all we like about what we don't know. You did what we know. You broke them. If we hadn't known already that Dragonfire unmade them, we'd know now. And, he stumbled, then firmed. And you came back. I thought, when I saw the spear, I thought... He could not finish. He took a little gasping breath that he turned into a laugh. I lost my place. Davos straightened, eyes going soft in that way their edges did when he thought of his own dead. We all do, he said quietly. A bell in the yard rang once. It was not an alarm. It was the sound they used to tell the men to change watch. The sound went through the stone and through Jon's bones. He felt hollowed by it, as if the bell had been tolling inside him for hours and he had only now heard it outside. He pushed from the table. I'll go out, he said. They'll want to see me walking. If I sit too long, I'll sleep here and some wit will come draw a beard on my face with soot. You already have a beard, Ed observed. Then they'll curl it wit. H a hot poker, Jon said despite himself, and that made Davos's eyes crinkle in approval. He stepped back into the night with the room's warmth in his skin like a memory. The cold made a mouth around him again. The wall reared. The stars had not changed. The wind had found a new thread to pull at in his cloak, and he would have to find and tie it. The simple annoyances of being a man among other men asserted themselves. He found them curiously dear. Rhaegal lay where he had left him, a great carved thing in the half-light. One wing spread away from the wound to keep the weight of it off, the other curled like a blanket. The woman had made a rude pillow of straw and cloth to prop under the neck where the spear had lodged. She sat now on a stool that she had dragged out, blowing on her fingers between tasks and scowling at any man who came too close. She looked up when Jon came near as if to say, "Don't start me," and when he did not she softened imperceptibly. "He will sleep," she announced, "which is more than I can promise you. Sleep is for the ones who pretend they have nothing to think about." "I can pretend," Jon said. "Then do, but not near me," she said. "Every time you breathe your thoughts leak out and my stool gets wobbly." She smiled a witch's tiny smile to show she meant less of it than she said. He sat anyway, on a crate that made his bones complain. Ghost came against his side again and he leaned into the direwolf. The night breathed around them. Men came and went, their shadows longer now as the brazier's coals settled. From the wall, the soft clatter of a dropped spearhead rang like a note dropped in a lake and swallowed. Somewhere a man laughed abruptly and then stopped. Hours passed there in their curious speedless way, a thing like water over stone. He watched the dragon's side rise and fall and counted the breaths once, twice, then stopped counting because it made his own breath uneasy. He stood once to walk the yard and let the men see him. He said to one the small thing needed saying, "Your bowstring is frayed," and to another a different small thing, "That lantern's wick wants trimming," and to a third only his name, because saying a man's name at the right moment is a kind of magic, sets him back into himself when he is drifting. He came back to the crate after and sat again. Ghost put his head in Jon's lap and fell with a thunk of trust that nearly unmanned him. And so he was there, near sleep without having fallen into it, when the sound came again that did not begin as sound. The stillness shifted. The hair on Ghost's neck rose. Rhaegal's eye opened to a sliver. The woman stopped mid-curse and cocked her head like a bird. Then the horn blew 3 times, slow and sure. Ed did not fumble this time. He blew the note as if he had been born to it. The air held the shape of it after it ceased, a curved thing that bent the space of the yard. Jon was already on his feet. "Positions," he said, and the men, who had already begun moving, moved faster without turning frantic. He did not run. There was no need for running. The dead did not require that of you. They required a very particular form of patience. He climbed the stairs with Ghost at his heel, not looking back at the dragon because the urge to stay and be only one creature's man for the night would make him less of many men's, and he could not afford that bargain. He gained the parapet and went to the place where the view was clean. The world beyond the wall had become different again without appearing to have changed. The stars were the same. The forest was a black fringe. The field he had burned showed slightly lighter, a scar in the dark. The one difference was this motion at last, no longer patient or waiting, came in waves, not uniform, not human. A river of bodies, lightless and numerous, moving toward the wall. He did not bother to count. Counting would not have comforted him or sharpened his mind. He looked for the leaders, the pale ones. He saw two near the back, gliding as if they needn't move their legs at all. He saw something else then, farther back still, like a flaw in his eye. He blinked. It remained. It was a patch in the dark that made the rest of the dark seem honest. It drew the eye the way a cold bruise draws a finger. He could not decide its shape, only that it held itself like a thing that did not need shape to be itself. The new cold came with it. He was suddenly glad he had not flown farther. "Oil," he said softly, then louder, "Oil now." Ed's voice echoed him. Oil. You could feel the men thank the word. They needed a thing to do that ended with a flame and a shout. They poured it. It ran black and thick down the face of the wall. Torches leaned in and touched it. Fire took and ran along the surface, bright and blue at its edge where the cold was greatest. It lit the faces of the men above and the faces of the dead below both, and it made the night shiver. The front rank of the dead reached the fire and climbed into it, arms up, unthinking. They burned and fell, making a pile that the next rank climbed. The wall's ice hissed. The oil crackled. The smell took hold, meat and pitch and old rags. John found that his stomach had room for anger even now. "You'll not climb us tonight," he said under his breath, as if he were speaking to a man at his own height. "You'll not break this." Arrows hissed down. Men shouted. The oil burned low. Then the dead began to pull the bodies of the fallen out of the fire and use them as mats, dragging them, laying them, climbing. The men above swore that human way that keeps a hand steady and a mind clear. They poured more oil. The wall shone again, the fire running down like a lit river. John scanned the line for the pale ones, hands tight at the rail. He saw a flash of one, the long hair, the bare ice-white skin in torchlight, and then lost it in the press. He saw only again the patch of dark that refused his eyes. He did not know what to call it, so he did not. He merely set it in his mind as a stone you will not forget the feel of, hidden in a walking path. "Ready the ladders," he said. It was a stupid order, everywhere wrong. There were no ladders for an attack of the dead. He had called for them because a fight for gates in human war wanted ladders. He bit off the rest of the thought and said instead, "Keep a chain on the gate wheel. If they throw their weight, it will turn whether our hands wish it or not." "Already done," Ed said. He always seemed to know the thing at the same time as John. Neither before nor after, the luck of long friendship. "I tied it myself. If the chain breaks, it will break my heart as well and will bury both together." "Don't say bury," a man said, pale in the torchlight. "Say burn." "Burn then," Ed conceded. "Will burn my heart. That'll warm some hands." They fought until the night itself felt bruised. Not with swords, not the way men prefer, face to face at a height with a name to the enemy before them. This was an uglier thing. It was pouring oil and aiming fire and watching a thing that had been a man fall and be trod by the man he once had hated or loved or been indifferent to in a way that matters only when men are alive. It was dropping stones and hearing them crunch and not letting that sound make you vomit. It was holding a rope that controlled a grate and not letting go when the rope burned, letting it cauterize your hands until you no longer felt them. It was Ed's humor growing worse and therefore more necessary. It was Davos's curses turning quietly into prayers that sounded like curses and might have been both. Through all of it, Jon did the smallest things a leader does that men feel. He moved along the line and made eye contact with some number of them. He said names. He took a torch and flung it himself into the oil stream as if to say he did not stay clean while they burned. He watched for that unseeing dark and tried to learn it. Rhaegal stirred once below and made the sound that meant pain and promise both. And it was so much like a man in pain refusing to stay still that Jon had to grip the rail to keep from climbing down. Near dawn, when the cold learns to curl into itself and the dark is most honest but not yet broken, the flow of dead slowed. The oil burned in calm lines now instead of ragged ones. The pile of char at the base of the wall made little cracking sounds as it settled. Men stood with their bowstrings slack but not released, eyes at half-mast, beards white at the edge. Jon dared to look for that flaw again. He found it. It had not moved, but it seemed nearer. He had the ridiculous thought that he had moved toward it, that all night he had been stepping in place and the floor had been taking him across the room to the thing he dreaded to be near. "See it," Davos murmured, coming up beside him like a memory of a friend in the dark. "Yes," Jon said. "I don't like it," Davos said, which was as much an admission of terror as any man need make. "You don't have to," Jon said. "No," Davos said, "but I will have to live with it. I suspect we all will. And if we don't, we will have to die with it, which is worse." Jon's mouth twisted and went back to straight. He watched the movement below. The dead did not all fall back. They found the piles and waited, their faces upturned as if to feel the dawn on what passed for skin. The pale ones among them had retreated farther, out of the flicker of firelight. They held themselves like men who have decided to send another in their place for the next trial. The dark that resisted a name merely hung in its place like a hole. He felt, suddenly, without warning, a sharp surge of certainty that all he had done that night had been seen and marked and not by accident. He could not decide whether that knowledge made him feel like a chess player or like a hare finding himself in a field with no hedge. He took that surge and crushed it down until it fit in him. He turned and shouted for water and for broth and for men to rest by turns and for Ed to sleep if he must do it standing. And then he went below when he could and sat near the dragon again and fell at last into the shallow collapsed sleep of men who have used the shape of their fear as a wall. And when he woke, the sun had come up pale and thin, not in triumph but in habit. The day was long and workmanlike. There were bodies to burn at the base of the wall and men to bind and a dragon's wound to tend and the thousand little necessities of holding a place where the world thinned. Jon did them as if doing them could make the night not arrive. The woman with the bitter bark shooed him away when his fretting made her hand less precise. Sam read in low tones to Ed, who had indeed fallen asleep sitting on a stool and kept waking to swear he had not. Davos went to the cook and returned with a heel of bread and an onion. Both cut in equal halves so a man could feel the fairness of the division. Tormund fell asleep on his feet and did not topple because pride held him up. When dusk came again, the men did not say, "Another night." Saying so would make it an enemy with a face. They merely set more oil to warm and checked their arrow supply and fed the horses with hands that smoothed their necks because men who tend horses take kindness where it offers itself. Jon went to Rhaegal and laid his forehead to the dragon's cheek. The breath that washed over him was not as hot as it had been. The spear still sat like a king at table. The woman gave Jon a look that said if he touched it without her say she would bite him. He would let her. He looked up to the wall and the pale sky above it and thought, separately and at once. Fire and ice are not enemies only. They are appetites. And then, also, the story of the wall built of song was foolish and might be truer than the books that sought to dismiss it. He turned as the horn blew once, twice in quick succession, not a third time, and every muse. CLE in his body made a little fist. He felt, for an instant, the urge that had taken him in the sky, to ride, to set fire, to answer with brightness a question that had been asked in dark so long that the asking had become its own thing. He had room for it inside now. He had made that room himself. He did not let it rule him. He went up the stairs with Ghost, with Davos, with Tormund. He took his place on the wall and looked out and began again the business of being the man he was making himself into at the very edge of the world. The dead were there. The pale ones would be there. The flaw in the night would be there too, the spot where he could not settle his eye. He leaned forward slightly as if a wind had nudged him, and though no wind had, he felt the nudge in truth. The story then was not one of last nights or first mornings. It was of middle work, of burning and being burned, of teaching a wall new tricks and learning the old names of hunger. He reached, in his mind, for the dragon behind him at his back, the beast and the brother both, and he imagined the heat of that breath not as a weapon but as a word. He did not yet know what that word would be, only that when he spoke it, he must mean it entirely, with every piece of himself laid bare as the world had been before the first snow fell. Ghost pressed his thigh. Davos cleared his throat as if to announce a meal on a ship where meals came on time or men stopped being themselves. Tormund cracked his knuckles and grinned at the dark, showing it his teeth like a man greeting an old enemy whose tricks he knew and respected even as he swore to break them. Sam murmured something behind him about 3 lines of a half-remembered spell that was not a spell but a kind of wish. Ed said, "Here we go again," in a tone that was almost fond. The men along the line shifted their weight, spat to the side, tightened their gloves, checked the placement of a stone with a toe, adjusted a bowstring, and became the shape of those who keep watch for all others. Jon set his hands on the rough timber and let the cold go into him. It did not take all. He had kept something back, a small flame not in his chest or belly, but behind his eyes where thought kept its own counsel. He watched, and he waited for the moment when patience ended and purpose began, and in that waiting he could feel the world's old powers gather as if they, too, leaned forward, curious to see which hunger would learn to name the other first.